Fair warning, this episode contains content relating to sexual assault and graphic descriptions of attacks on women. Welcome to the Murder and Movies Podcast, M&M for short.
Not sponsored.
Where once a week we sit around and talk about the darker sides of pop culture, film, and true crime. Woo!
Yeah.
We used to do our little singing, but we're still not sure if that's a copyright, so now we'll just cheer.
Woo.
But today we are talking about a case that I hadn't heard of originally. I don't know how I came upon this case, but it's talked about in different classes because you took a class and they talked about it.
I took a psychology class or a sociology class. I don't know. I took a class and we talked about it because of, I know you mentioned it, so I'll let you mention it.
Today we are talking about Catherine Susan Kitty Genovese. I will be referring to her as Kitty because that's what most people called her, but that was her nickname. We're going to jump right into the case. On March 13th, 1964, at around 2:30 in the morning, Kitty was returning from work. She worked at a bar around the area. This is Queens, New York that we're in. She parks her car and she begins to walk up to her apartment building and notices a guy leaning against the building. She thinks nothing of it because it's Queens, New York. I'm sure you're going to see a bunch of people on the street. So she doesn't even get a few feet before he stabs her, repeatedly begins to stab her. People who lived in, because where she was attacked was around other apartment buildings. Close by apartment building, people said that they heard her yelling, screaming, asking for help. And they spotted the man with her, but they weren't sure what was going on. They just heard her screaming for help. She had only made it a few feet away from the entrance into her apartment building. So like half a block. I don't know. I'm not from the city, but I know half a block is not very far.
She was so close.
So close to making it into her building. But that's where the first attack happened. So as she's getting attacked and she's yelling for help, there's someone in the apartment building across the street that turns on their light, and that kind of scares the guy off. And so he takes off. But Kitty is still there, bleeding on the sidewalk, and she crawls into the building. So I saw pictures of it. It's not really a foyer, but it's like a little tiny hallway, and then there's stairs that lead immediately into a door. So she makes it that far. The guy who had stabbed her didn't even technically leave the scene. He was waiting in his car. 10 minutes pass and he notices that no one is coming to save her. So he returns and begins to attack her again inside this little foyer area and stabs her, assaults her, and takes her money and then dips. A few minutes after he dips, a neighbor comes down and comforts her, yells for police. Police are called. They show up within a few minutes. And unfortunately, Kitty died in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. The entire attack, they said, took a little over 30 minutes, between 30 to 45 minutes. The entire attack from beginning to end happened and no one came. Which is why this case ends up getting a lot of attention, because it took a 45-minute attack in the middle of Queens, New York on a street where people heard her and no one came.
And he came back.
He waited 10 minutes after the first attack to come back and finish it off. 45 minutes in a place that I don't want to be is a very long time.
Yeah. Especially, like, if you're in pain and, like, scared. Like, they say time flies when you're having fun. It drags when you're scared. Like, Absolutely not.
Because she had been stabbed repeatedly. So she had a bunch of stab wounds, had been assaulted, and just had to take it pretty much.
Yeah, and she was yelling the whole time, I'm pretty sure. And just, like, imagine yelling and no one, like, that's literally a nightmare that I have, is I am yelling and no one's coming.
We'll jump into Kitty's backstory a little bit. She was born on July 7th, 1935, so this is an old case. 1935 in Brooklyn, New York. I've not been to New York. I don't know Brooklyn, Queens, all these areas, but if you know, you know. So yeah, she was born in Brooklyn. She was the oldest of 5 kids. She graduated from high school and her family ended up moving to Connecticut. And I had read somewhere it was because her mother had witnessed a murder while they were in Brooklyn. It was some kind of crime, and I had heard it was a murder. She had witnessed a murder and was like, no, New York, it's not safe anymore. We need to get our children out of here. And so they moved to Connecticut, but Kitty stayed in New York.
Oh my gosh, that's so sad. That's like foreshadowing.
She was close to her younger brother, Bill. And the only reason I bring that up is because Bill ends up doing, like, decades later, did a documentary called The Witness that you can watch on Amazon with ads. And it pretty much goes through the entire case. So a bulk of my information I got from this documentary. There's additional stuff that they had talked about. He tried to get in contact with the man who attacked her, pretty much confront him about the attack because he was young when it happened. And so he didn't understand everything and no one was really sharing information with him. And he even admitted that throughout the years he was kind of obsessed with this case.
Which I feel like that's fair.
Yeah, his other siblings weren't so much. They were like, why are you doing this documentary? But anyway, if you guys want to check that out, Amazon, it's free with ads. As an adult, she worked as a secretary at an insurance company, but at night she worked at a bar. And while she was working at this bar, she got promoted to manager, which kind of got her to move to Queens because that bar was in Queens. While there, she met her girlfriend, Marianne, and romantic girlfriend.
Okay.
Because when I read it, I was like, oh, her girlfriend, yes, sis. But no, it's like a romantic girlfriend, Marianne.
I feel like that probably made the police extra assholes when it came to investigating this.
It really did. It really did. And I will get into that most definitely. So she met Mary Ann a few years later after moving to Queens. And I had, so in the documentary, The Witness, her younger brother Bill gets in touch with Mary Ann because he didn't know his sister was gay. He just knew, like, there's this girl that my sister is always with all the time. And she comes to her house and visits. They're really close friends. But no, they were definitely in a romantic relationship. And he didn't know that. No one in the family knew.
Really?
It wasn't until years later that they even found out it was a romantic relationship. Because Marianne said that Kitty was kind of having an inner conflict with dealing with her emotions because she had been married before Kitty had to a man. And I don't know how that ended, but it ended. And then she met Marianne. But Marianne says that the way that they met is kind of cute, but also kind of creepy if Kitty had ended up being a murderer. So they met at a bar, and Kitty approached her and was hitting on her a little bit, like, hey, are you from the area? And Marianne was trying to describe, like, where she lived. And Kitty somehow figured it out and left a note at Marianne's door.
Hell no.
It's only romantic because she's not a murderer.
It's not romantic. It's horrifying.
I don't know how she finds it out. Maybe Marianne was very specific about where she lived, but Kitty figured it out and left a note at her door and was like, hey, I'm going to call you at the telephone across the street because, you know, olden times they had the phones outside. I'm going to call you across the street at 7, pick up. And Marianne did, and that's kind of how their relationship started. And they ended up moving in together, and they were living together at the time of this crime. But Marianne reports not hearing the attack or anything about that. So we'll jump into the investigation, which you kind of touched on a little bit, how the police were going to react to the whole situation.
Yeah, I think, so before we started recording, I thought she was a person of color, and I think it's because I remember the police were just, like, assholes about the whole investigation. And I was like, why are police assholes about investigations? And I was like, oh, a person of color, or a person with a non-normal sexual, well, not non-normal, like non-traditional sexual orientation would be the other reason.
During the investigation, police knocked at Marianne's door at 4 a.m. and pretty much explained to her what had happened to Kitty.
Oh my gosh, I can't even imagine that.
So at the time after they had approached her and were, you know, asking her a bunch of questions, I only bring this part up because it will be important later. She was being consoled at the time by a neighbor named Carl Ross, whose name will definitely come up multiple times. He consoled her by bringing alcohol, which, you know what, console me with alcohol.
Yeah.
The homicide detectives' names were John Carroll and Jerry Burns. And so they arrived and it got very inappropriate very fast because they picked up that Marianne and Kitty were in a romantic relationship. And so the questions started to shift from, you know, who's Kitty, into their sexual relationship. Yeah, they were asking very inappropriate questions about their romantic
Why does that
stuff.
matter? That doesn't matter.
It really doesn't, but they asked about their sex life. They questioned her for 6 hours.
I'm sorry, if they were questioning about her about her sex life and not about the crime, they obviously didn't think she was like a suspect. You didn't have to question her for 6 hours. Literally at 4 a.m. on the day she just found out her girlfriend was murdered. That's so messed up.
They did ask her, and they ended up asking the neighbors too about their relationship and about their sex life as well.
About the neighbor's sex life?
About Kitty and Marianne.
Ew.
It's like, how would they know? And why, again, does this even matter? So, of course, Marianne was named suspect number 1.
Apparently the police back then were also not the police, because it sounds like they were terrible at their job.
And they were detectives, of all people.
Absolutely not.
Yeah, and these detectives do not go away. They stay attached to this case the entire time. Less than a week later, I've heard it was either 5 or 6 days later, a man was caught trying to steal a television from someone's house. And so they arrested him, and it was a robbery in Queens, and they were asking him about it. And one of the investigators noticed that his car matched the description of the car that neighbors had said they saw the attacker get into. And so they asked him about it, and my mans did not wait. He pretty much flat out said, yeah, I did it.
Probably because he was like, oh yeah, I can definitely get away with this because the police are trash at their job.
The man's name is Winston Mosley. Again, he will pop up multiple times, not only because of the crime, but because of what happens after the fact. Winston Mosley, he was arrested for stealing appliances from many residences. So this was like his MO. Mostly was stealing from people, but he had never been caught before now. He was 29 years old, from Manhattan. He drove a white Corvair, which is how they knew that, or even suspected that he could have been involved in the case. And the detectives were pretty much like, you did it, didn't you? He was like, yeah. So not only did he confess to Kitty's murder, he confessed to multiple other murders, sexual assaults, and stealing from multiple people around the area.
I'm sorry. First off, Mans is an idiot. Firstly, for committing horrific crimes. And secondly, for just confessing.
He did not wait. He told them all the tea. He told them stuff about Kitty's murder that, of course, only the murderer would know. So that's how they believed him, that it was him. I didn't write notes on this, but in the documentary, he had talked about another assault that he had done where he had gone into this, or attacked this woman who had parked outside her house and beaten her and dragged her into her house and assaulted her while her family was asleep upstairs, and then began to, I think he laid paper or something and set it on fire, and the house caught on fire. Another thing that I saw in this documentary was that after he had killed Kitty, he was driving off and he was stopped at a red light. In the car in front of him, he noticed that the driver was asleep. So he gets out his car with his knife and goes up to their window and knocks on the window, wakes the person up and lets them go. He doesn't even attack them. And the detectives are like, why? He was like, I just didn't feel it in me that day. Yeah, he didn't feel it because after he had done to Kitty, he was pretty much said he got it out of his system.
I hate him.
And to make it worse, he said his motive, because of course they needed a motive, like, why did you attack this woman that you had no connection to? He didn't know her. He said that he just woke up that day and said, I want to kill someone. I want to kill a woman. And he spotted Kitty and followed her home.
I'm sorry, it sounds like his motive is he's a psychopath.
He also had made comments that, I don't deserve to be out. I'm a monster. I'll do it again.
So he was probably also had some mental health issues, which does not excuse what he did because he's a monster.
It's crazy because not only was this man married, but he had 2 children of his own.
Stop.
So he was a family man that went out and did these crimes just because he wanted to. I wonder what his wife has to say about the quality of their marriage. Something tells me he was abusive.
Yeah, I definitely get, he was probably abusive vibes.
I don't know that for fact, but considering what he could just carelessly do to women that he doesn't know, imagine what he would do to a woman he does know.
Yeah.
Like we had talked about in all our previous podcasts, how the hell were things being solved?
I don't.
If you didn't confess right out, or you weren't a person of color that they could just point at, I don't know how anything was being solved.
Yeah, I'm mad. Also, I feel really bad for his kids. No one talks about the kids of, serial killers, but, their lives are hard. Because, you can't stop loving them. That's your dad. Unless they were an abusive dick.
Well,
I don't know.
two things with that. So his son, I don't know if it's the same son, but in the documentary, he actually interviews one of Mosley's sons who works in a church, and he pretty much defended his dad.
Shut the fuck up.
So hard.
How?
He said that he felt that the only reason that he attacked Kitty was because she was saying racial slurs at him, and that's why he attacked her.
What about the other women that he murdered?
I don't know.
Also,
I have no clue.
You attacked her and her because she was saying racial slurs? Make it make sense, because it sure as frick does not.
He probably just knew his dad differently than everyone else and thought, not my dad. He's a black man in New York.
Yeah.
They're probably just accusing him of these crimes because it's easier than trying to find the real person who did it. But the thing is, he confessed, but then quickly said it was a mobster who did it, and he was only the getaway driver. That was what he said later. So he confessed and then was like, you know what, actually, I was working for the mob, and I was their getaway driver only.
Why is the mob always blamed? At this point, if anyone blames the mob for anything, I'm just going to be like, no, you did it.
This is what, the second or third story we've had?
And I'm researching another one where they try to blame the mob.
Who the frick gets in touch with the mob? I don't want to, but I'm just saying they make it sound so easy.
I have mob connections.
You have mob connections?
I do. Legitimately have mob connections. I knew someone when I was younger where his uncle was the number one hitman for the Italian mob. His uncle was in jail and he was not talking to his uncle at the time. I used to go hang out at this place, and my dad says that all of the men were in the mob, but I don't know if I believe that. But my dad used to be like, oh yeah, you would show up because I was 8, and he'd be like, yeah, and all the mob guys would be like, Elizabeth's here, keep it clean.
So I guess it is pretty easy to get in touch with the mob then.
Well, mine is very much coming from a place where I'm very privileged. It's because my aunt bred racehorses.
And the mob does love that.
And one of the horses was gifted to me to be my college fund. It's because I'm incredibly privileged.
I'm learning a lot. I have connections to the Crips. It's just interesting because all these people claim that it was the mob. I'm like, who the hell has connections to the mob?
And
she
it's
does.
me.
She does. So Gabe, watch out. Of course, he is being accused of murder, sexual assault, robbery, all these things that he
confessed to
and then said it was the mob. So the trial begun on June 8th, 1964. Initially, he pled not guilty. I don't know how he reasoned that, but his attorney later changed his plea to not guilty by reason of insanity.
Yeah, I was about to ask, was it because of insanity? It's always because of insanity if they've straight up confessed.
I feel like the standards for an insanity plea, especially back then, were very low. On June 11th, the jury deliberated for 7 hours before coming back with a guilty verdict. They sentenced him to death. However, that was overturned a couple years later, but it ended up being switched to life in prison, which heads up, he died not that long ago. I want to say he died in 2014.
I'm glad he's not alive anymore.
Mm-hmm. This asshole, so in the documentary, I'll keep referring to it because so much information happened from there. He refused to talk to Bill, Kitty's younger brother. He refused to talk to him. And he said it was because he felt like everyone was exploiting his story for profit. It's this dude, he's the brother of
his sister.
Yeah, he's not CNN. And you won't even talk to him?
Yeah.
What a dick.
Even in I don't know. Maybe if he was I'll do it off the record, maybe.
The New York Times printed a story about the attack and reported that around 38 people had heard or seen Kitty be attacked and did nothing. And no police were called. No one came to help her. And someone was quoted saying, I didn't want to get involved, which would end up being the number one statement that people would say in regards to Kitty, why no one helped Kitty, is because they didn't want to get involved. And this person, to be fair, was not misquoted completely. It was just taken out of context from the rest of what they said. However, that's what they ended up printing out. And because of this, people were 38 people heard her or saw her dying and did nothing. No police were called. They didn't try to stop the attack. Nothing. And so in the New York Times, they blamed the residents for her death a lot. Of course, it was the guy who killed her, but they blamed the residents and they blamed the people of New York for not protecting their people and being the reason why crime and all this stuff happened. So, of course, the public ate that crap up because you hear that and you're like, so many people sat by while this woman cried for help and no one did anything. One of the reasons why this case has gotten so popular is because of the New York Times, the article that they had printed out about it. When they went to court, I think they had 6 witnesses that they had on the stand, even though the article reported there were 38. One of the witnesses was a night elevator operator who reported seeing the entire attack, and instead of getting involved, he got on the elevator and went down to his apartment. Just left. So he's a piece of shit. Another man, Carl Ross, who was the one who had comforted Mary Ann, who was Kitty's girlfriend, saw the second attack that had happened in the foyer, because you know how I said in the foyer there were stairs and then there was like an apartment door? That was his apartment. So he had looked out, saw Kitty being attacked, closed the door, went and called a friend, asked his friend what he should do. The friend said, don't get involved. And that's what happened.
Are you freaking kidding me?
There was another person, Irene Frost. She lived on the second floor. She heard the shriek, went to the window, didn't see anything, heard another shriek, saw Kitty laid on the floor, and went back to bed. Then there was Robert Moser. He lived on the 7th floor. He saw Kitty kneeling with a man over her. He thought it was like a domestic thing, but he heard her yell, get off, or he heard her yelling, and he yelled back, get off of her. The man took off, so then he went back to bed. There was someone else named Andrea or Andre. She's French. Sure. Don't ask me to pronounce her last name. I'm going to say it's Pick or Pike. A pepper. But she lived on the 4th floor, heard neighbors screaming, saw a man run away towards the bus stop, saw Kitty get up and walk around towards the corner. From that point on, she couldn't see what happened, so she went back to bed. Patty Grund, police recorded that she saw a woman yelling help, but no one else. She just saw Kitty on the floor yelling help, but she didn't see anyone else around her. So, of course, she did nothing. Sophia Ferrar, a name that comes up multiple times, she claimed she checked on Kitty after attack and that Kitty was still alive. So in that foyer after the second attack, Sophia comes, checks on Kitty, and notices that she's bleeding a lot, but she's still alive, and they were close friends. Her son says that Kitty would come over and they would have coffee together and hang out. So his mother, Sophia, and Kitty were pretty close.
And she called 911, right?
No, she didn't.
Of course
call
not.
911.
Of course not.
Because of the multiple people who saw or heard something or were reported seeing something and didn't call the police, didn't help, didn't do anything, psychology and all the science and people looking into it came out with the bystander effect, which they also call the Genovese syndrome, which, of course, I had to look into because I'm not a psychiatrist or in psychology in any kind of way. It attempts to explain why people witnessing a crime would not help the victim. Because in theory, we all would think if I saw someone being attacked, I would do something. I may not fight the attacker because who the hell am I? But I'm going to do something. I'm going to call the police. I'm going to give aid in some way instead of going back to bed. Psychology today states the bystander effect occurs when the presence of others discourages an individual from intervening in an emergency situation against a bully or during an assault or other crime. The greater the number of bystanders, the less likely it is for any one of them to provide help to a person in distress. People are more likely to take action in a crisis when there are few or no other witnesses present. It's curious to me that the more people there are, the less likely you are to get help. But the fewer people, the more likely you are to get help.
I feel like I can kind of understand that because you're like, if there are more people, you're like, oh, this is okay. No one else is worried about it kind of thing. But I don't know. For me, I've seen this play out in classes because I went to high school. I saw people getting bullied. I understand the bystander effect in that way. But when it comes to like the sexual assault and murder of someone, I don't know, that's never okay.
I guess I can get it because if like school, like you were saying bullying, like a school fight happening in a hallway and there's a hallway full of other kids, why would I get involved? Everyone else is standing there watching, so I'm going to stand there and watch too. You don't want to be the one to step out of the group
Yeah.
and do something. But if it was just me and I saw two people fighting, I would feel inclined to say something because I'm the only one. So along with the bystander effect, there's two factors that researchers have found that contribute to the bystander effect. There's the diffusion of responsibility and social influence. The perceived diffusion of responsibility means that the more onlookers there are, the less personal responsibility individuals will feel to take action. Social influence means that individuals monitor the behavior of those around them to determine how to act, which kind of goes back to what we've been saying about the bullying. And if you saw a fight in a hallway at school, if no one else is reacting, then I think it's appropriate for me not to act.
Yeah.
But if it's just me, then I feel sole responsibility for what's happening.
Yeah.
I don't share that responsibility with anyone.
We read that article, and I remember the article, like, implying that the 38 people were directly, like, watching this happen. Like, for some reason, I definitely had the impression that this happened, like, in broad daylight with, like, people walking by and, like, people stopping and, like, staring. So I guess I misremembered it in that regard. But, yeah, no,
that's
I remember.
Definitely how the article presented
Yeah.
it.
I definitely remember just being, like, even someone overhearing someone crying for help. Like, I feel like I would still call 911 if I just heard someone screaming help, you know?
So it's the same thing, and we had talked about this before when I told you I was doing this case, how, and it's sad that you even have to be told this, but you're told when you are being assaulted to not yell rape, but to yell fire, because no one wants to see a rape, but they want to see a fire.
And also, like, if it's a rape, there's someone doing an action. If there's a fire, it's like being done to someone, you know? They're not confronting someone, they're confronting a thing, which is a fire. So people are more likely to call 911 for a fire than for a rape. This case is the reason why they tell you that. It's because Kitty was yelling help and no one was helping, so you're supposed to yell fire
because then everyone
help.
will want to look to see a fire. More recent studies about the bystander effect have also shown that the effect can generalize to workplace settings, where subordinates often refrain from informing managers regarding ideas, concerns, and opinions if no one else is doing it. If everyone's conforming to this one idea, I don't want to be the person to step out of line because I don't want that attention on me, and I just don't want the issue. You were talking about the New York Times article, how you had perceived it based on how they reported everything. So there was a lot of misinformation in that New York Times article that did not come out until much later because it was New York Times. People aren't going to question them.
Yeah.
They were like the giants of journalism. And no one thought, oh, the New York Times is bluffing, there's lies, anything like that. So nothing was questioned for decades. They took it verbatim, what was said. 40 years later, after the original report, so 40 years it took for the New York Times to investigate themselves. So it was the New York Times that re-examined their prior claims. They found that people actually did help. Carl Ross, who was, again, the one who lived right at the apartment outside of where she was being assaulted, Carl Ross, after talking with his friend over the phone, climbed out of his window and went to a neighbor's apartment, and he was the one that called the police. I don't know if he did that, if his intention to crawl out the window was to call the police, or he crawled out the window to seek for help, and while he was there at that apartment decided we need to call the police.
Yeah.
But the girl, Sophia Ferrar, who was the one who came to Kitty after the second attack, yelled to call the police. She was the one who yelled up and told people to call the police.
Because cell phones weren't a thing. That's fair.
Hattie Grund, who was one of the people that had reported hearing her screaming, claimed she also called the police, but the police have no record that she did this. And of course, this was said during the documentary when her little brother was questioning her. And so there's some doubt that, maybe she's just saying that to not seem like she didn't do anything.
Yeah, to be fair, I would also lie if I did that.
So, yeah, there's no report that she called, but she claims that she also called. Police log showed only Carl Ross was the one who had called, but they probably didn't have record. Someone else had reported that they had called the police. I forget who it was exactly. Had said that they had called the police, and the police were like, yeah, we've got multiple calls. We got it.
Yeah, that's the other thing. This is also at least 40 years later. So it would also make sense that, like, some of their logs, because they also didn't have computers, like may have been lost.
Most of the 38 witnesses that they had claimed saw the attack, majority of them had only heard it. A very few actually saw anything. So that was misinformation on the New York Times, because the way that they had presented it was that people saw it.
Yeah.
A bulk of them did not see it. They just heard the attack or heard a woman yelling and didn't see anything. Kitty had walked in and out of view from the people in this apartment building. So if they were to hear something and look out their window, a lot of times nobody saw anything. They just heard a woman and was like, I don't know what that is, and went back to bed. No one followed up with the alleged 38 witnesses, and people still aren't sure how they got this number.
So it was kind of like a sensationalized thing where they were like, oh my God, like somebody heard this and didn't call 911. Well, that's not a good story. How about 38 someone's didn't do anything?
The journalist claims that he went and asked a bunch of people, and that's how he got the number 38. But again, not all of these were technically, how can you be a witness of something if you think you heard something once you know what happened?
Yeah, that's true.
You're not technically a witness then.
Because, like, you know, that, like, once they found out what happened the next day, they were, like, reevaluating everything, being like, oh, my God, like, could I have helped? And then there
was
like,
that one thing that I heard a scream?
Yeah.
And especially if everyone else is in the building is saying the exact same thing, you probably feel like, oh, that must have been what really happened. Decades later, Sophia Ferrar's son claimed in a documentary that many of the residents were Jewish concentration camp survivors. And that's why they chose not to get involved, because, you know, they have a very bad,
like, history with police. And yeah, that now I feel bad for calling them dicks.
Well, I mean, that's the way that it was presented in the New York Times. So you weren't the only one who thought these people were horrible. One, the people did help.
Yeah.
When they knew that something was wrong. Some of them didn't even know there was an issue. And also, given their history.
Yeah, it makes sense why they might not run to the police or, like, feel like they could even intervene, because they were put in a position where they were very powerless.
Mm-hmm. So because of this entire case with Kitty, it led to the adoption of the 911 call. So originally when you would call the 911, you wouldn't call 911. You would go to the operator, who would then get you in contact with someone at the station. So there were definitely times where you may have to go through one person to get to another person to get to another person to get to the station that is closest to you. As opposed to nowadays, if you call 911, you get immediately in contact with your station. You don't have to do anything else. You just talk to the operator, and that's it. So because of this case, that's when they decided to adopt a 911 system. And also when they started to put those emergency lights, like on campus.
Yeah.
If you need to make an emergency call, they have those blue lights everywhere. I don't know if they're blue everywhere.
I think it's actually called, like, the blue light system.
Oh, okay.
So.
The blue light system. So her entire case also contributed to the invention of that. The first 911 call was made in 1968. Blows my mind, because I think about the fact that there's people that were born before this time that were alive when calling 911 was not like how it is today.
That's so weird that 911 has been around for like 50 years.
I guess it kind of made sense, because we talked about how the whole concept of police is also not that old.
Yeah, 1930s. They didn't have a national police force.
So I guess it makes sense that they also didn't have a 911 operating system that immediately connected you to the police.
I guess that's fair.
Can you imagine being born in 1968 when the 911 thing was just being made, and now they're making freaking CGI versions of people?
Wait, didn't we go to the moon in 69?
Oh, I don't know.
Oh. Like, isn't that when, like, the first man was on the moon was in 1969? And then the first police phone call happened a year before that?
Hey, Siri. When did the first man go to the moon?
Here's an answer from wikipedia.org.
Yeah!
Humans first landed on the moon on the 20th of July, 1969.
That's insane.
That's wild to me. Are we old? Can you imagine what technology is going to look like in 30 years? If, you know, in 1968, you could just then call 911, and now here we are. We've been to the moon multiple times.
We've gone to the moon so much that they were like, it's not even worth it anymore. And the U.S. doesn't even have, like, an active space program.
The guy who runs
We
Amazon
have a
went to the moon.
Space Force. He didn't go to the moon. He went to space.
Oh. Well, he went someplace I've never been.
We have a Space Force now. And we were, like, just got to the moon, like, 40 years ago. 50 years ago. I can do math. It's fine.
The first call was made as a ceremonial call between two Alabama politicians.
The first one was in freaking Alabama.
Yeah, Alabama was the one who really got this thing going, which no one would think Alabama's going to get 911 going, surely. No, but they did. It was between two Alabama politicians, and they really didn't talk about anything. They're like, hey, it works, son. They were like, oh, wow. Now we can have 911 calls.
Alabama.
Yeah, Alabama, of all places. Can't tell you what county it was.
That's fine. I'm just shocked that it was Alabama. Wild. Good job, Alabama.
One thing that we can congratulate you on.
Sorry if you're from
Alabama.
So sorry if you're from Alabama.
I'm from Alabama, so it's okay. But yeah, that is the story of Kitty and the whole bystander effect that rose from her case and how that has been misinterpreted.
Yeah.
Granted, the science behind it, yes, but the influence behind it was definitely misinformed.
Yeah, I'm sorry I called everyone in that building jerks. Y'all aren't. You had a really rough history. I understand why you didn't call the police right away.
But yeah, that is her story. If you guys have heard of this story or have any input into the whole psychology behind it, please let us know. Because again, I didn't study psychology. I took developmental psychology, which talked about babies, and I can tell you nothing.
I took an online psychology class in high school, and I took more naps in that class than I did class. So
we are not the ones to add more input into the psychology behind the bystander effect, but if you want to look into it, there's plenty of research, and they've developed it even more nowadays to apply to, like I said, workplace setting and relationships and siblings even. So you guys can check that out. If you want to check out The Witness, like I said, it's on Amazon, free with ads, even if you don't have an Amazon account or Amazon Prime account, because I have regular Amazon and I was able to watch it. So you can find it there.
We're not sponsored by Amazon, but Amazon, please, dear God, sponsor us.
Yes, not sponsored, but we would like to be. So if you guys do want to check that out, you can. Again, the only reason I keep bringing it up is that's where I got a bulk of my information. Plus, there's other stuff like the interviews I was talking about with Sophia's son and with Winston's son that was very irritating to watch. Yeah. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. If you have any suggestions for future podcasts, please let us know in the comment section. We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, Podbean, and so many others. So if you Google us and find us, thank you. And like I said, we're also on YouTube. So yeah, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and we will see you all next time. Bye.
Bye.